You may recall we did a series on the Lost Pubs of Eccles. We're going to attempt to do a series on the Lost Pubs of Salford. And as you can imagine, it's going to be quite a massive task, a very depressing one as well, I may add. Pre-World War II, Salford could boast of having over 400 pubs, beer houses, off-licence, but basically 400 pubs. Now I reckon we've got 24, if that. I'd help if someone could name them. I'd be more than grateful. As I say, we're in Weaste today, talking about the 6 pubs that were in Weaste. Now, if you're to come from Ladywell roundabout, from the Lamb Hotel to Regent Road, top of Regent Road, there was at one time over 30 odd pubs. Now there's none whatsoever. Regent Road's gone, Eccles New Road's gone. It's pretty depressing really, isn't it? But so shall we get on with the story of the 6 pubs of Weaste, and I shall tell you a little bit about each one. I'm standing on Foster Street in Weaste. Now behind me here once stood the the Swan Hotel. Wonderful pub, many happy hours spent in there. Now, there was a pub on this site from the 1830s. It's called the White Swan. The chap who owned it was John William Hicks, quite a character. The pub was rebuilt in 1890s, and the Salford City Reporter told a story that Hicks used to have a menagerie of birds in the vault, 60 birds in total. Parrots, bullfinches, parakeets, all flying around the vault, all living in harmony. He doesn't mention if any of them shat in your beer. I think I'm allowed to say that. Early photographs show there was just be a public urinal actually outside on on Eccles New Road. When the alterations were made in the 1890s, that was demolished, and the toilets were hygienically brought inside the pub. It led fairly quiet life in the 60s. It became a Whitbread pub. Does anybody remember Stan and Eileen Robinson? They had the pub for many years. What I do recall from my misspent youth, I used to come in here with a chap called Cliff Emsley, whose father was the caretaker of St Luke's School. We were underage, and the reason we came in, it had a striptease jukebox. You put your tanner or a shilling in the jukebox, you'd get your tune of your choice, and then there'd be a buxom lady, rather coyly, stripping off to the jukebox sounds. It was quite daring for those days, I suppose, really, wasn't it? In the 70s, late 70s, 77 actually, I was working with Neil Richardson, writing for a magazine called What's Doing, and the landlady had found some photographs and bottles up in the attic, and she asked Neil and I to come down and photograph them and write an article, which we did. The interesting part is there was a band practicing. We were in the attic, there was a big concert room, a band were practicing, and it didn't sound too good, to be honest. We went to the bar after we'd done our work, got a pint, and the boys from the band were at the bar and asked us what they thought of it. I said it was all right, we didn't like saying it was rubbish. And I said, what's the name of the band? And they said Warsaw, later to become Joy Division. Now, in those days, the camera only had 36 exposures, and we'd taken them all of the bottles and photographs we'd found. If we'd have taken photographs of Warsaw in that pub then, we'd have made a good few quid, we really would. But it's one of those things. Now, 1993, Vox Breweries took over. The pub was declining actually, I thought. There was quite a few colourful characters in there. I used to still drink in the pub. People, Jimmy Beswick, remember Jimmy Beswick? He used to booze in here. Barry Calderwood, Paul Travis. Anyway, the axe fell in 1996. The pub closed, and the reason given for closure is going to be the tram was coming from Eccles and it'd be cutting through the pub. As you can see, it goes nowhere near the pub, and in my opinion, the pub could have stayed open. Lovely big old pub. I'm sure many of you will have great memories of it, but All we've got now is this tree growing on it and this wildlife. But it was a great pub, this one, and I had many, many happy hours in there. The pub behind me is the Grey Mare. We're filming from on the corner of Modewheel Road. Now this road has particular memories for me. To the left of me here was St Luke's Primary School, and my friend Cliff Emsley, his dad Eric Emsley, was the caretaker. And in the summer months he would let us run riot more or less in the school. It was great, piano there and big playgrounds for messing about in, and it was supposed to be haunted by the monk. But I digress. Behind me, the Grey Mare pub. There's been a pub on this site since the 1830s. There was a chap called Thomas Gorton was the owner. It was a beer house. And the row of shops that used to be alongside it, the road was called Gorton's Buildings, not Eccles New Road, Gorton's Buildings. 1898, the Salford Brewers, Groves and Whitnalls took over the pub, and they realised it was basically just a house, and they were selling beer from the front room and the kitchen, which the licensing authorities didn't like. So they altered the pub to their best they could size of it. And on the frontage they added new, you can see on the brickwork, new, what would you call it? Well, it's a new frontage basically, and also the cottage next door, which became a tobacconist newsagent shop. Landlord 1933, no one will remember this, is a long time ago, Jessie Hampson, but she was there for over 35 years, which is quite a record for a landlady. Now in 1977 a compulsory purchase order was made to have the pub demolished and the row of houses, Gorton's Buildings, which I mentioned earlier. Fortunately it was turned down and the pub was continued to serve up till it was going in the 2010 I think it would be. 2003, I'm sorry about that. It became a Ventrell's Hotel, which you can see behind me. I've no idea who Ventrell's are. I know they have... Sorry, can't just say it's Travell's, not Ventrell's. I'm thinking of the pop band. It became a Travell's Hotel. There's a chain of them by all accounts. The Paddock pub on Cross Lane, that is one of them as well. I'm unsure of who resides in there. I've been told various stories, students, immigrants, etc., homeless people. I'm not bothered, to be honest. I've got a roof over their head. I did spend quite a few hours in there in my misspent youth with Cliff Emsley, Colin Jones, Lou Thomas, Les Batty. Quite a lively, vibrant pub, as they used to call it, wasn't it? With a jukebox, a room available for brawls. There was regular fights in there. I enjoyed the pub, not the fighting, obviously. As I say, the pub is still standing, which is a good thing. Just looking round me, it's hard to believe that Eccles New Road, such a vibrant, busy thoroughfare, shops of every description, and now nothing. No pubs, no shops, anything. Quite depressing really, isn't it? We are now outside the Coach and Horses on Eccles New Road. There's quite a bit of history with this pub, we'll tell you about shortly obviously. The main thing is it's a grade 2 listed building, and that I think alone is the reason it's not been demolished by Mr. Humphrey Smith of the brewery, who will tell you a little bit about more. Now the pub, I'll just read this out for you. It's described as being a rare example of a virtually intact Edwardian suburban pub. Bar fittings, acid etched windows, iron windows, mosaic tiling to the entrance halls and floors. And as you can see, you can't see any of them. I assume the windows are boarded up for vandalism, theft, breaking in, etc. But anyway, I shall tell you a little bit more about it. There's a pub on this site from the 1850s. There used to be rows of shops alongside the pub, and I was interested to find it was called Beach Villas, which I think is a better name than Eccles New Road. Beach Villas sounds quite posh, doesn't it? 1900s, the Rochdale and Manor Brewery, they took over the pub. But it wasn't until 1913 that this pub was built. It's a fantastic pub. It's really well built Edwardian stock brick. Then in 1948, Sam Smith's Tadcaster Brewery took over. And from then there's a tale of woe. There always is with me, isn't there? But I can remember it being a lively pub. They had great football teams. They had dart teams. There's even a small pool table in the back there. But there was also a little snug. People may remember that. It was like something like Coronation Street where the little old dears could sit in and have a glass of stout or whatever they preferred. It's a lovely pub. And I can recall one evening going in with my brother Peter. It'd be about 1970. And they had then what they called discos. And they had go-go dancers. I kid you not. Young ladies with hot pants frugging and dancing and gyrating wildly. And I think one of them may have possibly been Michelle Cantliff. Now, let's wait for the tram to go by. I'm not saying it was Michelle, but she did tell me that she was a go-go dancer in several bars, clubs, so it may have been you, Michelle. I'm not saying it was. But I'd like to get this off my chest. Humphrey Smith, the owner of the brewery, now he's a tyrant, no other word for him. Sue me, I'm not bothered. He closes pubs on a whim. If you've seen using a mobile phone, he'd throw you out. He will not have in his pub fruit machines, jukebox, televisions. I agree with some of that. Pubs should be for socialising and chatting in, etc. But he'll go round in the evening. He looks a scruffy person, to be honest. I can say that, and he is. And if he finds anything in the pub that displeases him, he'll close the pub down. He's notorious for it. The Albert Edward in Eccles, one of my favourite pubs, that has been closed now for a good 3 years. He went in, had an argument with the temporary landlord and shut the pub down. He closed down the Prince of Wales in Broughton, the racecourse in Broughton, the windmill in Swinton. I think the windmill has been reopened. But there's just no need for it. He's daft. He's a billionaire by all accounts. He owns 200 pubs. So if you're watching, don't sue me. Just open the Albert Edward pub up and this one. And the other ones are mentioned. There's no need for it. So, you know, don't sue me actually, but there you go. Yeah, so that's the issue of this pub. And hopefully it'll reopen soon. Grand building, grade 2 listed. And I think that's the reason he cannot knock it down. Behind me was a pub. There was a pub called the Grapes. Honest Jim's, as I knew it as. I'll get back to Jim in a minute. As I say, the pub was licensed in 1863 and was called the Cemetery Inn. Now, the reason it was called that was because of its proximity to Weaste Cemetery, round the corner, which opened in 1857. They eventually changed the name of the pub back to the Grapes in the 1880s. It was purchased by Walker and Humphreys, the Salford brewery, and then in 1948 was taken over by Wilson's. The pub was remodernised, rebuilt with a really nice tile frontage on it, I recall. It's only a small pub with a vault, middle room and a long corridor down to the toilets. I remember that quite well. Now, in 1979, the landlord, James Doughton, Honest Jim as he was called, a lovely man, and the pub was known for having ATs, staybacks, quite a regular occurrence there. And the Salford Reporter told the story that the police, plainclothes, had started visiting the pub and they were getting staybacks and ingratiating themselves with the locals. And one evening they were sat in there with the locals on a Sunday evening and the police raided it. All arrested. I've heard stories about people giving false names, which I think you would do, wouldn't you? One chap, the police said to him, "What's yours?" And he said, "A pint of bitter." That was quite funny. But the sad side of the story is Jim lost his licence through this. And he died in tragic circumstances, shall we say. I'll just leave it at that. The pub never really reopened and it was demolished in the 80s. But it's still known to regulars, locals who went in there and people from Salford as Honest Jim's. as I say, he was a nice man, and he shouldn't have bet the end he did. Well, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, the Grapes pub, great pub. Continuing with our tour of the Lost Pubs of Weaste, behind me, houses now obviously, there stood a huge, impressive pub called the Royal, or the Widow's Rest as it was better known, because of its proximity to the cemetery obviously. Now, in the 1860s, a chap called Henry Bowden, he purchased a beer house, which was a house on the corner. And it was interesting to see that that stretch of Eccles New Road was called Nottingham Terrace. I never knew that. I remember the row of houses though. Yeah, I don't know why it's called Nottingham Terrace and not Eccles New Road, but there you go. I came across a court case story now. In 1871, he applied for a spirits licence on the grounds that, and I quote this, ladies who fainted at funerals in Weaste Cemetery had to be carried, not and not walk 430 yards to the cemetery inn, which was the Grapes I mentioned before. Great excuse that, isn't it? Anyway, he was not back on it. He didn't get his spirits licence, but strangely enough, the next year he applied and they gave it him. So the ladies the widows could sup brandy to their heart's content. The new pub was eventually built in 1930 by Hardy's Brewery. A huge pub, people remember it. I think it had bedrooms, but it had a huge vault, concert rooms, billiard table, everything in it. Landlords Frank Fryer, Gerald Johnson. Now, in 1990, the pub reverted its name back to the Widow's Rest, which is obviously its common and nickname, and eventually was closed in 1999. But my little story about the pub, when I was working for Salford Sewage Works down Borough Road, a chap knew I was a Manchester United fan, and he said he had international caps, Irish ones, belonging to a Manchester United player, David Byrne. I'd never heard of David Byrne. I know not the lead singer from Talking Heads. And I met David in here with him. He was a small chap, very quiet, well-spoken, and he actually had the Irish international caps with him. He told me a bit about Manchester United. He only played for a couple of seasons. I was intrigued by his life, and say a few years later, Carl and we made a video in Weaste Cemetery about David Byrne. Manchester United eventually paid for his headstone. He was a lovely, quiet, unassuming man, and yeah, if you get a chance, look up David Byrne, and more importantly, try and look at our video we made. I think it's a belter, it really is. Well worth a watch, honestly. But the pub now is gone, just memories. I used to play football on here as a kid. I was about 15, 14, waiting for Ma Willie's Vimto shop to open. There used to be public toilets here, and stonemasons, I think it was called Marx's Stonemasons. There was headstones and angels and cherubs in the yard there in the front. We never stole any, honestly, but yeah, Cemetery Road. But the Royal, gone. That's all we've got. This, believe it or not, behind me was a pub, the Old Veterans. Now Nikita's house. We'll come back to that shortly. Now, what I did find interesting about this pub was that in August 1880, Henry Hargreaves, who'd served in Salford Police Borough, in Salford Police for 24 years, asked for permission to turn his house into a pub, and it was granted. I can only assume, because he was a policeman, they'd think there'd be no trouble in there, and he was a good law-abiding citizen, which hopefully he was. The pub was converted, and he called it the Old Veterans Tavern. Now, was that a reflection on his job in the police force, or a military connection, the Veterans Tavern? But over the years, it got abbreviated to the Old Veterans, or the Old Vets. 1891, Groves and Whitnalls, the Salford brewers, brought the house off him, made alterations, and made it into a proper pub. Before it was just a beer house, couldn't sell spirits. In in the 1977, this area was Bridson Street, Stowell Street, and it became the compulsory purchase area. All the streets around here were all demolished. The ones over there, you can see, they were all demolished. But there was a petition to save the pub. Camera, the beer guide people, they organised it, and thousands of people signed the petition saying it was just a great example of a street corner pub, which it was. And 1986 they extended it. They bought the two houses next door and extended the rear of it. Busy pub, and they also changed its name to the Ugly Duckling. Does anybody remember that? A stupid name, isn't it? The Ugly Duckling. Anyway, that didn't last long, and in 2005 it became Nikita's house. Now, who Nikita is, I've not a clue. Who owns it, I don't have a clue. I've heard various stories, which I'm not going to go into here. One thing I did find strange, the street here is now called My Street, when for years it was called Duxbury Street. Everyone will remember it as Duxbury Street. But the original My Street was on Eccles New Road, further down that way near the Waverley pub. And I've not a clue why this happened. They changed the name of Duxbury Street and kept the name My Street. I found it a bit odd anyway, so My Street, not My Street. Nikita's house, I assume you can't get a drink in there. I'm not going to try anyway. But yeah, there we go. So that's the 6 pubs of Weaste that we've covered. And in the next few weeks we'll be covering Regent Road, Eccles New Road, possibly Cross Lane if we get the chance, and we'll do the best we can anyway to remind you of what we've lost, Broad Street, etc. As you can imagine, with 400 pubs and just me and Carl, it's going to be a long job, innit? But thanks for watching, and cheers.